Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone, and I've literally just walked in the door from having been to see Avengers Endgame. And so I want to share my thoughts with you about that film. There are going to be spoilers in this review. So if you don't want anything spoiled, go away, watch the film, and then come back later because I'm going to spoil a lot of stuff here. If you don't mind spoilers, then hang around and watch away. My reference point for this film really is Avengers Infinity War. I watched it again last night in preparation for going to see this film, and Avengers Infinity War, it makes sense to me to be the sort of primary reference point for Endgame, because Endgame is the conclusion to that story, it's the continuation, it's the previous film in this storyline, and so it makes sense that that would be the primary point of reference. And as I was watching Infinity War again last night, it dawned on me that this is a film that really shouldn't work, but it actually does. To me, it's a fine wine film. It's a film that gets better with age. Watching it again last night, I think it's the fifth or sixth time I've seen it since watching it at the movies. And for me, I appreciate more about that film this time around than what I did when I first went to see it in the cinema. The four things that really stuck out to me last night when I was watching it that really should have undermined and tanked this film. First of all, it's got a large ensemble cast of main characters, but it uses them well. In the hands of lesser mortals, that would have been an absolute disaster, because basically they wouldn't have constructed the story right so that you have an appropriate amount of screen time where no one character is hogging the screen, and you use all your characters well. They do that, and they do that really, really well in that film. Not only that, but you've also got multiple storylines all unfolding at once. They do that well. Never do you find yourself stopping to ask what's going on here, where are we now? You know, you're never too long on one storyline. You know, they jump between them in an appropriate lapse of time between each, and it works really, really well. You've got a CG villain in that film. A CG villain who has a lot of screen time. That could have completely tanked that movie. Again, in the hands of mere mortals, if they hadn't got that CG villain right, if they hadn't got Thanos right, they would have tanked the film. It would have been an absolute disaster. Apart from one or two minor moments where I think the CG is noticeable, it's sort of, just for me, I saw things, and I saw them again last night, as I did the first time I saw it in the cinema. But overall, they got the CG pretty good with Thanos, and so it doesn't draw you out of the film. And then lastly, this is a film which is yet another very typical save the world from a doomsday device type plot. But in this film, it works really, really well. And the reason it works really, really well is because the doomsday plot has some unique traits that are different. First of all, he doesn't want to kill everyone or enslave everyone. He only wants to kill half of all living things, and he's doing that because he's a psychopath, a deranged psychopath who believes that if he does that, he will actually save the world, make it a better place. It's insane, it's suicidal, but it's unique, and it changes the stakes a little bit in the nature of what's going on. Also, he doesn't want to be king of the universe and take power at the end of it all. He believes this is an act of service. He will carry out this act, he will destroy half of all living things, and then he will wander off into the sunset. That's a unique aspect to this. It's not typical. So all in all, this film really works well despite those four major issues where it could have been an absolute disaster. And the other thing about the film is that it's a long movie, Avengers Infinity War, but you don't feel the runtime. Again, this is something that really stuck out to me last night. I think, as I said, the fifth or sixth time I've watched this since seeing it in the cinemas. And yet, normally, you know, by this many go-arounds, you start to notice the length of a film. No, you don't with this movie. It actually uses the time it takes to tell its story really, really well. The slowest point in the film, which is absolutely appropriate that it is this way, is the intro scene to that film. And then it just ramps up from there and doesn't let up and keeps going and building. And that is absolutely appropriate for that film, and you don't feel the runtime. You get to the end of that film and it feels really, really good. It's really well done. So for me, that is my sort of primary reference point that I'm starting with when I think about this film. Now, let me clear up a myth that has been floating around on social media in the last couple of days, and I think it was Grace Randolph who might have first propagated this, and I've seen others as well. But people are suggesting that this is the perfect superhero movie and that it is better than The Dark Knight. No, that is not true. This film is good, but Endgame is not better than The Dark Knight. It doesn't actually hold a candle. It's not the same type of film. This is a film that doesn't wander off the field of play. It's very much in the tone of what you would expect from Marvel. It is a Marvel movie. It's very different to what The Dark Knight was. The Dark Knight was a genre-defying superhero movie. This is not a genre-defying superhero movie. It is exactly what you would expect, I think, a good superhero movie to be, and it is exactly what you would expect a Marvel movie to be. It definitely stays within its field of play, and it does that really, really well. It is a good film, and it is a great piece of craftsmanship, but it has flaws. The flaws, I think, are understandable in the context of what they're trying to do. They're trying to close out a chapter here, and so there's certain amounts of sort of tribute that they're doing here, paying tribute and honour to what's gone before. And so when you have that type of, or those types of moments happening in the world, they tend to get a little bit messy. And so that's where the flaws come into this film. It is what I would describe as a beautifully flawed piece of craftsmanship. It is a good film, but it's not The Dark Knight. It's not better than The Dark Knight. It's not the best superhero movie that's ever been made. So is it the best Marvel movie? No, I don't think it is the best Marvel movie. I'll explain more at the end what I mean by that, but basically, for me, Winter Soldier is the gold standard. This film is not better than The Winter Soldier, I don't think. A close second, possibly I would even say second equal for me, is Avengers Infinity War, which I think is the best of the Avengers movies. And it's a pretty close tie, slightly behind Winter Soldier. This film, Endgame, I think is third to me behind those other two. I'll explain more, but I don't think it's as good as Infinity War was, and I don't think it meets the standard that is set by Winter Soldier. One of the other questions that I've seen a lot of people asking is, does Captain Marvel ruin this movie? No, Captain Marvel does not ruin this movie. Captain Marvel is actually hardly in the film. And that makes perfect creative sense. It would be an absolute absurdity to have a movie where you have spent years building up a group of characters and this is their crescendo moment, and then you insert a brand new character who doesn't really have a lot of heft in this franchise anyway so far, and then you would have put that character into that final crescendo moment and have them dominate. That would be an absurdity. It would really distract and let down everything you've built up to. And the people creating this film, they know that. They know what they're doing. And so she's used very sparingly, and she doesn't dominate the film at all, and she certainly doesn't ruin it. I thought she was used relatively well. It'll be interesting to see how she goes moving forward, because clearly they are setting her up to become a more dominant player in the franchise, and that's clearly going to be her role in future. But even her appearance in this film, although she's used well, there's something about her that just, I don't know what it is, but she doesn't quite feel right. She's not connecting, or certainly for me as an audience member. And I don't have a dog in the whole Captain Marvel fight. I haven't been to see Captain Marvel yet. But even her appearance for me in this film, there's just something about her screen presence that's not quite clicking. Now that may change as they shift into a new ensemble cast. It may work out a lot better, but clearly that's what they're setting her up for in the future. There are a couple of scenes in the film that I thought lacked a little bit of subtlety. One of them is there is a scene in the final battle, the big crescendo, the final act of the film, which is great by the way, where you have a whole lot of our female superheroes who all get together and they have this big female empowerment moment. And it was as subtle as a brick to the side of the head. And it's inconsistent with the tone of the rest of the film. The rest of the film just tells its story. This, to me, that just lacks subtlety. There's also another moment at the beginning, but it didn't stick out as, I don't think it's as unsubtle, but definitely also lacked a bit of subtlety, where Steve Rogers is running a bit of a therapy support group for people, and there's a guy there who tells a story. And I thought, again, that was a little bit of an unsubtle moment of wokeness. But overall, I mean, this is not a moment. These are not moments that destroy the film. They don't tank the film or anything. It's not riddled with them. As I said, it tells its story, and it tells its story well. But that moment for me just lacked subtlety. And as soon as I saw it, I thought to myself, this is going to be a scene in the film that is going to be fodder for bloggers and commentary writers and others who are going to say, look at this was an amazing moment of female empowerment and smashing the patriarchy, and like that's what this moment is going to be. And it just, as I said, it's not major, it's a minor criticism on my part, but it's definitely out of character with the rest of the film, and it was blatantly unsubtle. It's like, hey, look at us, we're doing our bit because we're going to tick this political box. It just felt, it felt very unsubtle. The other thing that I felt was a little bit of overkill was the way Pepper Potts is used in that final battle. Now, it makes sense for her to be there because of what the crescendo moment in this movie is with the death of Tony Stark. It makes absolute sense that she is there for that moment. What doesn't make sense is the way she is present in that battle, because she is set up in this film as a character who is no longer living her old life. She is now living out in the wilderness with Tony, and she is now a mother. And on top of that, the Iron Man suit that Tony has built for her, it's set up in this very film. We are told at the beginning of the movie that she's not wearing it. In other words, she's not a superhero. She's not living the life of a superhero. She's not practicing to be a superhero, yet she turns up in this final battle and she is a well-honed, well-oiled fighting machine. It's like she's been an Avenger for years. That is not how she's set up in this film. And to me, I found that jarring. It really stuck out for me. That was not well set up. To have her doing that and to have that lack of setup, to me that was odd. To have her there was fine, and it makes perfect sense for the story. But to have her turning up as if she's been a seasoned professional Avenger for years, and she's participating in this battle like, the rest of the well-honed superheroes on that field of battle, that's something that just doesn't make any sense at all. Now, like I said, these are things that are not so unsubtle that they destroy the movie. They're not major criticisms, but they're things that I did notice as I was watching the film. I guess they're those flaws, those imperfections, as I said, that stick out. But they're also, I think that one with Pepper Potts in particular is understandable in the context of what they're trying to do and how this is sort of a concluding chapter and what they're trying to do in that concluding chapter with the story. Another thing for me that I found really frustrating was there is a piece of junk philosophy, an absurd piece of junk philosophy in this film. It's around the character of Thor, and he uses this absurd truism, if you like, where basically the philosophy he is espousing is utter nonsense. And the philosophy is be who you are, not who you are supposed to be. So don't try and be someone you're supposed to be, just be who you are. And it's actually an absurdity when you think about it. And for me, why I find this frustrating, I'm not surprised. We live in a culture where we have lost touch with our deep philosophical roots. I think the primary reason for that is because we no longer have the same connection with the transcendent that we once did, the transcendent reality of the cosmos. And so our philosophy suffers, and you often get very superficial. We live in an age where we're in the shallow end of the pool, and shallow waters don't run deep. So it's not terribly surprising to see junk philosophy turn up in films. But in a superhero film, it's kind of frustrating, especially one that's got a bit more of a serious tone to it, because a superhero film is a great example to actually explore some deeper moral philosophy and some more interesting and well thought out expressions of how to live a full and flourishing life of virtue. So what's wrong with this idea, this junk philosophy? Well, in actual fact, to live a full and flourishing life, you do want to be striving to be who you are supposed to be. Who are we supposed to be? I think we are supposed to be people who live or strive to live according to the truth, and who strive to live a life of virtue and goodness, to actually be good, morally good people, striving to do that. Now, we're not saints. We're going to make plenty of mistakes along the way, and we are imperfect at that. No one is going to be perfect, and in our attempts to strive at that, we're going to make plenty of mistakes along the way, but we should be striving to actually be who we should be. To say, don't be who you should be and just be who you are, is actually an excuse to not seek out redemption. It's an excuse not to be a good person. It's an excuse to be a lazy, selfish, self-gratifying person. It's an absurdity. It's a cop-out. It's not a philosophy. Think about this in the context of someone who's actually doing evil things, who is not treating others well. You don't want them to say, I shouldn't try and be someone I'm supposed to be. I should just be who I am and keep doing this. You want them to actually stop and amend their ways. I guess the worst case scenario would be someone like Adolf Hitler or Stalin. You don't want them saying, you know what, I should just be who I am and embrace this. No. If what you're embracing is falsehood, if what you're embracing is evil, you actually should be striving to be who you're supposed to be, which is someone who is embracing truth and living virtue. And so it's frustrating. Again, it doesn't tank the film. It's not a major thing, but it crops up several times. It's around the character of Thor. And I think what makes it so frustrating for me is because, as I said, superhero movies are an opportunity to explore that kind of stuff in a bit more depth. And I think that was a lost opportunity. Another thing I noticed was I felt that a couple of the lighter moments didn't land so well in this film. Overall, I think the humor's good in this film. It's actually well used. It's very typical of Marvel. It's that witty banter that very much typifies the Marvel cinematic universe. In this film, it is used a lot more sparingly. It's used very appropriately considering the tone of the movie, but there were just one or two moments of the lighter moments that, for me anyway, they didn't quite land. They don't ruin anything. The humor in this, as I said, is good. But one or two of them didn't quite land for me as well as I think they could have. One thing that I thought was a real positive about this film, and I really loved, was the old Captain America. So at the end of that film, when he reappears as an old man, that makeup work, I'm assuming it was makeup, and the preparation they did for that, the acting, the mannerisms, the voice, that was excellent. That was really good. It felt like Steve Rogers. It felt like Captain America, but it also felt like a character who actually had become old, had aged, had lived a full life, and there's something different about him now. It wasn't just the same character pretending to be old, and the look too. I don't know how much of it was CG enhanced. I'm assuming that was primarily a makeup job. That one, it was really phenomenal. I really loved that. The other thing for me that really stuck out as a point of excellence in the craftsmanship here was the young Michael Douglas we see, a very brief moment of young Michael Douglas. Now, I'm assuming that was a CG enhanced face, that wasn't an actor. I could be wrong. I haven't done the research to verify this. I've literally, as I said, just walked in the door from having been to see the film. But if that was a CG enhanced face, as I think it is, that was excellent. Man, that was phenomenal. They really nailed that. That's a great piece of craftsmanship in this film. Thor was also a nice touch, I thought, having a fat, out of shape Thor. That was a very clever piece of storytelling craftsmanship, I thought. However, there is a bit of an issue in that you've got this guy with this bloated body. He is this boorish, overweight, loutish flatmate, basically. And the one thing that I thought was actually quite good was that they didn't change his body shape. I thought there was going to be like a Rocky montage of training and he was going to get back into shape for the final battle, but they didn't change it. I thought that was clever as well. They just kept him as he was, flaws and all. However, there was something that for me that was noticeable, and that was the fact that despite the body work and I guess it's a bodysuit he was wearing, however they've done that aspect of the character with the fat belly and the fact that he's out of shape, his face does not look out of shape. And just sticking a scruffy big beard on top of his face does not actually make him look out of shape in the face. And so you can tell that he's got the head and the face basically of a well-toned man, but his body is out of shape. And there are two things that sort of I noticed. And the reason I noticed it because I've got experience in this as a former fat man, and I know that your face is one of the primary places where you actually see weight gain on a person. And it was the other way around with this. And so there's moments where it just felt a little bit odd. The other thing that I thought was interesting, and I a couple of times I found myself wondering with his character, like I get the whole loutish flatmate out of shape thing, but then it also felt like they not only fattened him, but they also feminized him. And I thought that was kind of weird because he comes across like almost like a stereotypical hormonal, menopausal female character at times. It was kind of weird the way they did that. And I wondered to myself when I saw those scenes, that didn't quite make sense. To me, it would have made more sense that basically if he was more of a sort of drunken lout, he's overweight, out of shape, and acting like a thug because he's kind of angry and he's carrying this anger around him. And they do sort of set that up at the beginning where we're told, we don't mention the name of Thanos around here. But instead, it's kind of weird, this mix of things they do there. And I wondered to myself when I saw that, did they see him in Ghostbusters and think, hey, we'd like him to do a bit more of that style of humour in our movie too? And we'd like him to show his comedy chops in that sort of similar way that he did in the Ghostbusters film. And I just wondered whether that played into it a little bit. I don't know. But that aspect of his character I thought was just a little bit weird. It didn't quite make as much sense. Again, doesn't destroy the movie. And I thought it was a great touch, though, to have this overweight, out of shape Thor in the film. Okay, so let's talk about the two big death scenes. The two characters who we've been journeying with for all these years who die in this film. Because one I thought was excellent, the other one was not as good. The first character to die is Black Widow. And her death for me, there's just something about it that just didn't quite work. Clearly they're going for emotional impact, but I felt that did not have the emotional impact that it really should have had. I don't know whether it was the fact that they did a big emotive musical swell to try and drum up the emotion, but just the setup, the lead up to that, it doesn't, to me, that is one of the weaknesses in this film. That it doesn't really work. It's trying to have that emotional heft. It clearly wants us to feel it, but it doesn't really construct it well enough, I don't think. There's things even about the build up to that. It's kind of odd, this whole, how both of them are duking it out to be the one to make the sacrifice. The other thing about that, I was drawn out of the movie at this moment. For me, this is a weakness in this film, where I was drawn out of the movie because the whole point, I thought, of the Soul Stone was that you had to sacrifice something that you love. But now there's been a subtle but very profound shift in the Soul Stone in this film, where all of a sudden it's about losing something you love. And so the person themselves can make the sacrifice. To me, at that point I had myself sort of scratching my head and thinking, hold on a minute, isn't this a change to what the plot of this whole universe is with the Soul Stone? So that to me stuck out for me first of all. But then just the way the death plays out, it didn't have the heft. To me, there's something about it. It didn't have the impact that I think it was deserving of and that it should have had. The other death is the death of Tony Stark, of Iron Man. That did have heft. That did have emotional impact. And one of the big differences here is they used silence, and that gave that death poignancy. You could have heard a pin drop in that theatre that I was in tonight. And that scene, that moment was excellent. And it was because they didn't try and crowd it out, as we often do in these types of movies, with a big emotional musical score moment. They had silence. And it really, silence is a profound thing because we hear very little of it in our world today. And so to have silence and have it at a moment like that, man, that worked well. That was excellent. And having Pepper Potts there, that's why she had to be there, as I said earlier. Having her there was perfect. It worked really well. The funeral scene, a little bit soppy, a bit of a posing type setup as we sort of run the camera down the line. That was one of those tribute moments I was talking about. It's just a little bit, to me, that's an imperfection. That felt sappy. But the rest of that death scene doesn't feel sappy at all. It's really, really well done. It is not overstated, and because it's not overstated and it's done with a certain sense of subtlety and nuance, it actually makes that scene really, really powerful. Black Widow, not so much. And for me, that was a bit of a letdown. So, to wrap this review up, overall, how would I rate this film? Well, as I've said, this is not Marvel's best movie. It is not the best superhero movie that's ever been made. It is not better than The Dark Knight. This, for me, is close, but it is not as good as Avengers Infinity War. It's not as tight. Avengers Infinity War is a much tighter film. And one of the things that I felt about this movie was that it actually went on a little bit too long. It's the final act is just a great battle scene and a great crescendo worthy of the Avengers. It really is a moment where they're closing things out and they're like, let's throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And they do it well. I think it's a great piece of fun. It's a great piece of tribute to what's gone before. What happens after that though, where we have these couple of extra scenes tacked onto the end, and I get it, they're trying to close out Captain America as well, and that felt really tacked on. It's like they were closing down Tony Stark, and they were bringing his timeline to an end, and then all of a sudden, we're also now closing the timeline on Captain America, and I just felt I guess they had to do it because this is what they're doing. They're shutting down this chapter and they're moving on to the next one. And what they did there, it was great. There was nothing wrong with what they did. It's just by that stage, the film felt like it was over, and this felt like an afterthought that they were tacking onto the end, which was a bit of a shame. The other one was the scene with the Guardians of the Galaxy and with Thor. It's a funny scene. It's a bit of a repeat of a comedic theme we've already seen in the previous movie, Infinity War. It is funny though, but that felt more like a deleted scene that had been tacked onto the end of the movie as well. And those couple of things they did at the end, I felt actually the film peters out. With the death of Tony Stark, there was a crescendo. There was this big pinnacle moment. But then all of a sudden, it's like, okay, and we're going to add another couple of things in there as well. As I said, those imperfections exist because they're trying to pay tribute. They're trying to close something out. But Infinity War was a lot tighter. You don't feel the time at any point in Infinity War. In this movie, there's a couple of moments. It's not as well paced. And the ending is one of the big moments where you start to notice the pacing a little bit in this film. So for me, overall, it is a good film. It is, I think, a fitting conclusion, largely fitting conclusion. There are things I think that could have been improved, but overall, this is in the top 3 Marvel films ever made. It's a very, very close second to Avengers Infinity War. It's a great film, and it really shows the sort of, I guess, the maturing of this franchise and what it's able to do. It's a shame that I guess its sister franchise in Star Wars, which is also on the Disney bandwagon, doesn't have the same respect for fans and for the mythology and the storytelling as what this one does, and doesn't give it the same creativity, because the Avengers really, it's phenomenal. It's good, it's great, it's well worth watching. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comment section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please consider financially supporting the channel. The links for how you can do that are found in the video description below. Thanks for watching. See you next time on Left Foot Media.